Hey everybody, so today we're going to be coloring this cute Magnolia image called Charming Edwin, and I've already stamped him on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper with archival jet black ink, and I had someone request that I colored this, so we're going to watercolor him today. So if you'd like to check out this kit, head over to the store, and there's a link down in the description, and see if he's still available. So let's color. Alright, so I'm going to start by outlining my image with weathered wood. So I've already tested my water brush to make sure it's wet enough. I'm going to grab me a little bit of my weathered wood onto my brush. Then I'm going to start down here just a little bit up from the bottom of his shoe. And I'm going to come up here, and I try to work in sections so it can't dry, so I'm going to go about that far. And then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off my brush. And then I'm going to come back while it's still wet and brush it out here into my white. Pull it away from my image out into the background until it fades into just nothing. But you don't want to do it too much. If you went all the way around and then came back, that line would have already dried, and it would be impossible for you to spread it around. It would just be this huge yucky mess. Okay, so I'm going to come up here, grab a little bit more ink, and then I'm going to continue around. So let's go up here and do around some of these little flowers. And there I've run out of ink, so I'm going to come up here and I'm going to spread this out towards my background. And then I always dab my brush off before I grab more ink because it tends to get a little too damp. Then we'll go up here and get more ink. And we're going to continue all the way around to our image. So I'm going to go up here, and he's got a few spaces in some of these flowers, so I'm going to get in between some of those. Okay, and that looks far enough. And then we'll come down and just spread that line out so it's nice and soft. Let's go up here and add some more. Here in between our flowers. Okay, and wipe your brush off, and then come back with just your water and spread that out. Makes it just a nice soft background color. Okay, it's got a little bit more spaces here in between his flowers, so let's get a few of those. Dab around in there. And I got a little bit more ink that time, so I'm going to go ahead and go just that far, and I'm going to come back with just my water and wipe that up here. I don't want that to get that's pretty dark. So we're going to spread that out. And I can actually go clear over here and spread this ink clear over here underneath of his chin. That way we don't have to go back and add more to that side, because I had quite a bit on my brush that time. Okay, got a little bit on this leaf, so let's wipe that off. Now I think I'll come down here and start down here. And come up. So again, I'm going to start down here where his curve of his pants is. Come up here underneath some of this little bushes. These are the stems of his flowers he's got there. And then we're just going to wipe that out here into the background. Nice soft line. Okay, so let's continue around his hand. And up here around his heart. And I've run out of ink, so I'm going to wipe my brush off all the way. And then come up here and just soften that line. Just wipe, 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 wipe. Okay, and start where you left off, and just come right back around and add some more color. And we're getting close over here to where we already started. Just going to wipe that away. And gives him a nice light blue gray tone all the way around his body there. And then for the ground, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to grab some pumice stone for that. So let me open up my brown palette. And I'll get a little bit of, make sure I got all my blue off my ink, off my water brush here. Grab me a little bit of pumice stone. And I want the ground not to stop exactly at the bottom of his boot, so that's why I did the background up here just a little bit more. Or I started his shadow for a little bit further up, so I could bring my ink down up a little bit further so it looks like he's not just standing on a straight line. And we're just going to pull that out here to the side. Like that, and just soften that up. Okay, I want to darken it up just a little bit more, so I'm going to grab a little bit more on the end of my brush. I think I'll make it a little bit darker underneath where he's standing here. Just to add a tad bit more. And you can let that dry and come back and add as many layers as you want to darken it up as however dark you would like. Okay, so I'm liking that, so I'm going to leave it like that. So let's go up here and work on his skin. So for his skin, we're going to start with our tattered rose. So we're going to get some of that on your brush. And I always start by laying down where I want it to be darkest, and I want his hand to be darkest underneath. I'm going to lay a little bit, and then I'm going to go down over here to this hand, and I'm going to lay a little bit, because I have quite a bit on my brush. And then I'm going to wipe that excess off, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to use that ink I laid down to spread up to the top of his hand. Same for this side. And I'm just looking for a nice light first coat. And we'll go up here and we'll get his neck. He's got a little bit of neck in there. But just dab a little bit on there because he's got such a small area for that. And then for his face, grab a little bit more ink. And I want to say that it's kind of shining, the light shining from this way. So this side of his face is going to be darker. So I'm going to start with my ink over here on this side. And underneath of his hair the most. And then my ink has pretty much run out there, but I'm going to make sure to wipe my brush off. And then I'm going to come back and use that ink I laid down to pull to this side of his face. And mine's just barely pink on this side over here, but that's perfect because that's just my first coat. So now that his hands have dried, I'm going to come back down here. I'm going to add a little bit more. A little bit more on the end of my brush. But I kind of skip around when I'm painting, so I'll do whatever's not touching something else. So if I colored his skin and it was still wet, then I maybe would go down here and work on his boots, or I'd go over here and work on this, the paper maybe, if his face was still drying. I don't usually just color right in a straight line. I skip around and let it dry in between coats, and then come back. Okay, so we're going to add another coat to his face. I'm going to go up here and add a little bit more up here, starting underneath his hair. And then come down this way and brush it around over there. And then we'll come back with just the water on our brush and pull it into the middle. Like that. That looks pretty good. Okay, so while that is drying, let's go down here and do his boots, because that's way away, so we don't have to worry about touching anything that's wet. So for that, we're going to start with pumice stone. So you're going to grab a little bit of pumice stone on your brush, and remember you want to lay down where you want it to be darkest. So I'm going to start right here in between the crack of his shoe and the back of this boot, and right along the bottom of that boot. Okay, and that's quite a bit of ink, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pull that all the way over and cover up his shoe and the sole. And that is a perfect first coat. So now we'll go up here and we're going to add some shadows to our skin. And for that I'm going to use Tattered Rose and tea dye that I've mixed together, and I use it all the time, so I now have it just mixed in my palette, so I don't have to mix it every single time. But I'm going to use that to add some shadows. So I'm going to say he's got some shadows right here along the bottom of his hand. And I'm going to wipe my brush off, and then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to very lightly rub that out into his skin. And by the time I get over here, I've picked up quite a bit of ink. So I'm going to wipe my brush off again, and I'm going to come back and redo that softening of that line. And then I'll wipe my brush off and I'll come grab a little bit more. And we're going to do this side of his hand. So I'm going to do a little bit next to his thumb, and then I'm going to go right underneath and get a little bit right here where his thumb's touching that heart. And again, you wipe your brush off and then come in and just very lightly feather that line away and up towards the top. And by the time you get to the other side, you've picked up quite a bit of ink. So wipe your brush off again and then come back if it still needs feathered and do it again. Let's add a little bit to his neck. And then we're going to do his face. So pull a little bit of our shadow here. And I'm going to want it to be darkest on this side. So I'm going to go right along the edge of his face here. Like that. And maybe add a little bit underneath of his hairline there. And then again, wipe your brush off. And then come back and feather that line into his face. And because his face is such a big area, I'm going to pull it out just a little bit further than I did for his arms or for his hands and his neck there. Okay, but I picked up a lot of ink, so I'm going to wipe my brush off and then come back and feather it a little bit more out here. Like that. And then we can go down here and we can add his second coat to his boots, and for that we're going to use walnut stain. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of that on my brush. And remember, walnut stain is pretty dark, so you're not going to need quite as much as you did before. So I'm going to put that right here in the crack of his boot. And I'm going to do one boot at a time. So I'm going to like that. And then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off. And then I'm going to come in and just use my water. And it's going to be darkest down here at the bottom. So I'm going to pull a little bit more of, like, from the bottom of the boot. And then I'm going to say it's going to have a little shiny spot over here. So by the time I got over here, my ink has been diluted and it's got a nice little shiny patch here at the top of his boot. Okay, and then we're going to do the other side. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my walnut stain on my brush, and again, you want to put it down where you want it to be darkest. So I want it to be darkest back here in the back, and let's do just a little bit up here, maybe along this. Okay, and then wipe your brush off because that's quite a bit of ink. And I'm going to soften this one up here first because I got quite a bit on there. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off and then come back start from the bottom down here and wipe that up. So again, I want it to be darker down here towards the sole, so I'm going to start wiping my ink that way. And my brush is picking up quite a bit of ink, so I may need to wipe it off. I'm just going to kind of gauge by how much is on there. Oh, nope, that's looking perfect. So even though I've got a little bit of ink there on the end of my brush, it ended up being really light up here at the top, which is what I wanted. Okay, I'm liking how those boots look. So let's go up here and add some cheek color to his cheeks. And for that, we're going to use Warm lipstick. So let me switch to my color palette. Okay, Warm lipstick. Alright, so we're going to grab a little bit of our Warm lipstick on our brush. And he's got some great little lines or little dots around his cheeks, so I'm going to use those as my color guide. And I'm going to put a little bit on there. Whoops, that's quite a bit. So let's wipe our brush off. And then I'm going to just use some water to come in and soften that, make it round out here just a little bit. And as I use my brush, look at how much ink I've picked up. So make sure to wipe all that off, and then you're going to come over here and do the same thing to this side. And I'm kind of making sure I touch the edge of his cheek there on that side. And then I'm going to wipe that brush off again because that's a lot of ink still. Then I'm going to come back and soften just the edge of that line. Okay, that looks pretty good for a first coat, so we're going to let that dry. So while that is drying, let's go do his hair. That'll give his cheeks a nice chance to dry. So for his cheeks, we're going to, or not his cheeks, his hair, we're going to color in the same color we colored his boots. So we're going to go ahead and start with our pumice stone. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush. And I'm going to start by laying my ink down in this little part he's got right here. So I'm going to brush a little bit of ink out here with my brush. Like this, and my brush is running out, so I'm going to go ahead and just go the whole way on this side. If you still had a bunch on there, I would wipe it off and then pull it. But since there's hardly any left on there, I think mine's going to be fine. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this side. I'm going to pull it all the way over here and cover all of his hair. And it's way lighter over here on this side, clear at the end, than it is here in the middle. And I wanted this side of his head to be a little bit darker because remember he's tipping his head down and the sun's going to come from over here. So this side's going to be shinier. Okay, so we're going to let that dry. But while that's drying, let's go add another coat to his face. And for that I'm going to do Tattered Rose again. So I'm going to grab some of that on my brush, and we're going to lay down where we want it to be darkest. So I'm going to go right along this side of his face. And I think I'll put just a little bit on this side. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And I'm going to come in and I'm just going to pull that towards the middle of his face. And soften up. I'm going to go over the edges of his little cheeks there a couple of times. And brush it over the top of that just a little bit more. Kind of swirl it around, I guess. Just so the edges of those cheeks aren't quite so harsh. I don't want them to be big pink circles. I want to be able to see that there's just a little pink on there, but not quite so drastic for me. Okay, now I'm liking how that's looking, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to go and we're going to add our second coat to our hair. And for that we're going to use walnut stain. So remember, walnut stain's really dark, so you don't need that much. So again, I'm going to start in the middle of his head, where his part is. So I'm going to lay down my walnut stain right here in his part. And we're going to pull out here into this side. And remember, this side of his head I want to be a little bit darker. So my brush is looking kind of like it's not got much ink, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that all the way down to the bottom down here. So it's going to be darker over here on this side. Okay, and then we're going to use that ink I have left on my brush and this little bit I put down to pull this way. And I'm going to concentrate to kind of pull it more towards his bangs here and leave this part more shiny up here at the top. So I'm going to use most of my ink pulling down here along the side, and then I'm going to come back up and brush a little bit of that right up here to the top. So that add a little bit more of my walnut stain, but it won't be quite as dark up here on this very top section. Okay, so that is going to have to dry. So while that is drying, let's go do... No, I'm just going to let it dry for a second so that we can do our walnut stain, and then we'll go do his pants. Alright, so let's add another coat of our walnut stain. Grab some of that. Whoops, that's the wrong color. I've got to get the right color first. Grab a little bit of walnut stain, and again I'm going to lay it down where I want it to be my darkest. So I'm going to start here in the crease of his hair and his part. And I'm going to say I'm going to pull it out this way just a little bit more. But I want to also add just a little bit down here. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off my brush. And then I'm going to come in and lightly pull this side up here. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off again. And then I'm going to come up here and pull down just a little bit. Okay, and you have picked up quite a bit of that walnut stain, so wipe your brush off again. And then pull down, because I want it to be a little bit lighter in this little crease right here compared to down here where it's tipped most and his hair part. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here. I'm going to pull this out here to this side. Grab a little bit more here. And I'm going to say I want it to be a little bit dark right here where it kind of tips underneath of his hair. And maybe a little bit right here next to his face. Okay, so I've wiped my brush off, and then I'm going to come back and dab that ink and pull it out here into his hair a little bit. Like that. That looks pretty good. So I think I'm going to leave his hair like that. And you may need to add more layers, or just look at your hair and see how much darkness you want on there, but it may take you more coats. It just depends on how much you put on the first time. So let's go down here and work on his pants. So as for his pants, we're going to go ahead and use Chipped Sapphire. And Chipped Sapphire has kind of a purplish base to it, so you're not going to want to mess with it a million times. I'm just going to spread it on and go with the color I get the first time. So I'm going to start on this front leg right here, and I'm going to lay down a little bit right in the seam of his pants, the back of his pants, like this. And I still have quite a bit of ink on my brush, so I'm going to wipe that off just a little bit. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to use this ink I laid down. Oh, and it's drying already, so you got to be quicker. and I'm going to use that ink to pull over here to this side of his pants. I didn't put lots of layers on when I did his pants. I left them kind of white and light blue. Okay, so that's pretty good for first coat. So let's do this other side. So I'm going to grab a little bit more. And let's go from up here where his fanny starts. And he's got a little bit of the back of his overall showing right there, so I'm going to color that in. And then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to go down the back of his pants, like so. And then I'm going to come back and brush that line towards the seam. Okay, that's perfect. And then we'll grab a little bit more. And I'm going to go on this side of the seam now. So let's go down here and do the bottom part first. So I'm going to go right next to the seam. So it'll be really dark right there where the seam comes in. And he's got a little spot right here in his pants and this little seam. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to just wipe that and cover up this whole section of the front of his pants here. Okay, and I've got a little bit of ink on my brush. So I'm going to go up here and just lightly go over this little pocket. So it's a nice light blue. And I think I'll grab a little bit more because I still have a little bit on my brush and add it to this side too. Alright, so let's continue and go do the top part of his overalls. So I'm going to go right next to that seam. And dip right by that pocket. Come down here. Around over there. Okay, and then just use your ink to pull that up here and use the rest of these overalls down on the bib part. And I'll use a little bit to go over this little middle patch on his pants there. Okay. And if your brush is feeling dry while you're coloring, remember you can always give it a little squeeze to add a little bit more. Okay, and let's go up here and do his straps. I'm going to pull that down. Grab another little bit. Pull that down. And then I'm going to come back down here and we're going to add some to this front leg again. I guess it's the back leg. So I'm going to go right down the seam. I don't like how it left that little line there. So I'm going to come back over that line and pull more of that ink out here into his pants. It's not quite so harsh. And then my ink's pretty much run out, so I'm going to go over this little pocket here and add a little bit of blue. And let's color up this and add a little bit of our blue to that. Okay. Then we're going to do the same thing, this back one. So again, I'm going to start up here at his booty. Go down the back of his booty. Come down here. And if you have a lot of ink on your brush, wipe that off. And then come back and go right over that line and pull it towards that seam. Okay, and let's add some to the front seam here. A little bit like that. And I have quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe some of that off. And then come back and soften that line towards the edge of his pants here. And again, I think I'll go over that little pocket just a little bit. And then I think this little thing right here in the middle of his pants could use a little bit more color, so let's add a little bit to that. I don't mind that his pockets are really light, but I think that needs to be darkened up a little bit. And maybe a little bit up here on his overalls a little bit on the bib part. So I'm going to add a little bit up here along the edge there. And then my brush is pretty much run out. So I'm going to use just that little bit I have there laid down to kind of spread down onto the bib of his overalls right here. Okay, those look good. So let's go do, I'm going to leave those. I'm liking that. Let's go over here and work on this little heart. And for the heart, we're going to use Festive Berries. So I'll grab some of that. And I want my heart to be darkest on this side and the bottom by his hand. So I'm going to lay my Festive Berries down right along that and along the back side here. And then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off, and we're going to use that ink to wipe up towards the top of our little heart. Right up in here. And if you get a little bit on the ruffle, that's fine, because you're going to add ink to that later too. I'm just doing it a little bit at a time so this can dry. Alright, that's a pretty good first coat. So while that's drying, let's go... Well, let's do this paper here now, so that we don't have to worry about getting any of our green on our paper. Okay, so for our paper, we're going to start out with antique linen. So let's get some of that. And he's got just a little bit of paper down here at this bottom, so I'm going to add that first. I'm just going to touch down a little bit. Okay, and that's pretty green, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe my brush off, and then I'm going to pull a little bit of that ink back up and wipe it off. I don't want it to be quite that greenish color, because antique linen's got a green base. And so I try to use it sparingly and then add more colors on top. Okay, and then I'm going to grab a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing over here, so I want it to be darkest right next to his pants. And then the fold of this paper is going to be a little bit darker and right next to his arm. So I'm going to wipe a little bit, and then I'm going to clean my brush off and then come back and just move that ink around. I want to move it clear up here to the top of this paper. Okay, and I've picked up quite a bit of ink, so I'm going to wipe all that off. And I want to do the back of the paper too. So in the back, he's got some little sections in between the flowers that are sticking out. So like right down here, here's a little bit of our paper. And in here, you're just going to have to kind of look at it. And when I got all done, I actually had to go back and add some more. I missed some paper spaces. When I got all finished, I went back and added some in there. So here's a little bit right here. And then up here, there's a little bit poking out. Okay, that's a good first coat. So let's go over here and add a little bit more color to our heart. So we're going to grab some more Festive Berries. Okay, and again I want to start down here, add my darkness down here towards this side of my heart. So I'm going to add some of that color in there. And then we're going to use that to bring it up towards this side. And I got quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then come back and soften that a little bit more. Looks pretty good. Alright, so while that's drying, I'm going to go down here and add some color to my paper. So I'm going to add my second coat, which is going to be frayed burlap. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some of that. And I just want to add it where I want to add some shadow. So I want to add a little bit of shadow to this bottom piece of paper. Here, maybe right here in the seam a little bit. You're just going to have to go along and kind of see where you want to add some shadows in there. Okay, and so for this paper, I definitely want to have some shadows right next to his body and his hand. Okay, and my ink's running out, so I'm going to just wipe that before it can dry. I'm going to spread that out just a little bit. I'm going to grab a little bit more. And this little piece of paper here in the seam is going to cast a shadow, so let's put a little bit in there. And then the paper towards the back here is going to have a little bit. So I'm going to put a little bit on my seam right there. Lightly spread that out here. And I think I'll even add a little bit up here to this little piece up here. Right next to these flowers, I'll put a little bit. And then use that to spread up towards the top just a tad. Yeah, I'm liking that. So I'm going to leave that like that. And let's go add some more color to this cute little heart. So For our heart, we're going to go ahead and add some more festive berries. So let's get some of that. And I'm kind of liking how the inside of my heart looks, so I'm going to leave that. And I'm going to go now and add some to my ruffle. So I'm going to start over here on this side where I want it to be darkest. And I'm just going to swirl that around in each little section. And I'm trying to be careful not to go outside of the lines because it's red. So once you get outside the lines, red's not very forgiving. And I'm just continuing all the way around until I've used it all to the other side. And then you can go back, and if I missed a couple little white spots, I'm going to go back and dab those just a little bit. Okay, and also on the paper over here, there were a couple of places that had little hearts on them. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my festive berries. Like right here, there's a little heart. So I'm going to go ahead and just color that whole little section. There's like a little square there. I'm going to color it festive berries. And then right up here above this one little flower, there's a little tiny peeking out little heart section. So I'm going to color that. Okay. And then you may give that a second to dry. But once it's dry, you're going to go back and I'm going to add another coat to my little ruffle here. So I want this side to be darker. So I'm going to go back with more of my festive berries and darken up this side just a bit more. I'm thinking it needs to have another coat. Okay, and then I want to add a darken up way down here at the bottom a little bit more too. Okay, my ink is running out. That's perfect. So it's going to be lighter up here at this top than it compared down to the bottom. And I think I want to add just a tiny bit more to this little heart up here by the flower. Grab just a little bit more. And I can always come back later and add even another coat there. Alright, so let's do the flower stems. So for the stems and the leaves, we're going to use peeled paint. So grab some of our peeled paint. I'm going to start down here on the stems. So let's do down here. And I started towards the paper and just pulled my ink towards the bottom. Okay, and then I'll go up here and do our leaves. So I'm going to pick some leaves. So I want it to be more dark. These down here to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to start with this very bottom one. And put some ink on there and pull it down towards the bottom. And then my ink's running out. So I'm going to go ahead and do the next leaf. So it's going to be a little bit lighter. And this one looks like it's going to get a lot of sun, so I'm not going to need as much ink on my brush, so the third time through is going to be great. And this one here looks like it's going to be getting some sun, so let's go ahead and add a little bit of our light on there. That. Okay, and I've pretty much run out of ink, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. And I'm going to go back. And this little rose has some little leaves down here at the bottom of its petal. So I'm going to color those in with my dark green. And then here's one that's kind of underneath, so I'm going to do that one. And here's a stem, so let's go ahead and do that stem. Oh, here's a stem. We got lots of ink on our brush. I'm going to add some green in there to green that up. Okay, and then I'll wipe my brush off. And I'm going to grab some more. And this one kind of folds underneath, so I'm going to start there by putting it darkest right underneath. And then this is further away from the sun, so I'm going to touch down over here on this side and then push up towards the edge so it'll be lighter up here at the top. And this one looks like it's kind of getting a little bit of sun, so let's put a little bit of light on there. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off and grab some more. And just got some petals coming off some of these flowers, so I want to get some of those. Like that. Okay, I think I got them all, but I'm sure I'll see some more once I get to coloring the flowers, and then I'll come back and do those. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to, while that's drying, I'm going to do his shirt because this heart has had a chance to dry. And for his shirt, I just used a little bit of weathered wood to add just a little bit of color. So I've grabbed a little bit of my weathered wood on my brush, and I think I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Let me get a little bit more on there. And I'm going to start where I want the shadows to be. So right here next to his arm and his pants is going to be a little bit of shadow. And maybe a little bit next to his little overalls. And I'm going to barely go along the edge of this little heart. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to pull that little bit, just to add a tiny, tiny bit of color to his shirt, out here into the rest of his shirt. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more. And let's say that, like, this side's going to, whoops, that's not blue. So what happens when you're not paying attention, you dab it in the wrong thing. Okay, so let that dry just a second. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit of my weathered wood, and we're going to go right along the edge of this shirt. And let's add a little bit of our blue in here on this shirt. Try to clean up some of that peeled paint I just added to that. Okay, that looks good. But I also, right up here, I missed a little bit of weathered wood right in this little spot in between my flower right here. So I'm going to add a little bit of that right here. And I'm trying not to touch that green. I told you you'd probably come back and you'd see little spaces you'd missed. So there was one I missed right there. Okay, so I'm going to give that green another second to dry, and then we're going to do the flowers. Okay, so that's still drying just a little bit. But I think I'm going to darken up my stems down here while I'm waiting for my leaves to dry up there at the top. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of my peeled paint. And I want to darken these up just a tad bit more. They're kind of light and droopy here. Give those a second coat. And I'm really liking how the leaves look, and they're all different shades, so I'm going to leave those. And for the flowers, we are going to use seedless preserves. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on my brush. And it's a nice, pretty purple. Okay, so I want my flowers to be darkest towards the bottom of each one. And this one, the sun's going to kind of shine over here. So you just kind of look at it and go, oh, the sun's shining down. So it's going to be maybe darker down here, but the sun's going to be shining up here, so you want it to be a little bit more shiny. But I'm going to start down here at the bottom with this one. And I'm just going to add a dab of my paint right along the bottom of my petal. And then I'm going to wipe all that excess off. And I'm going to come in and use that excess to come up towards the top of my rose. So it's going to be a nice, light, pretty purple at the top. Like that. Okay, then I'm going to do the same thing with the next one. So I'm going to grab me a little bit more on my brush. And I want this one to be darkest down here at the bottom. So I'm going to go right along the bottom, right along this edge. Maybe bring a little bit up here. Wipe that excess ink off. Come back with just your water and bring that extra ink away from that line and cover up the rest of this little rose. Like that. That looks great. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So this one's kind of touching it right here. So I'm going to add a little bit right there where it's touching it. Then we're going to go right along the bottom. And then we're just going to use our extra ink here that we have laid down to brush up onto this flower. Soften that line. And I'm going to have to come back. This one I don't think has enough ink in there, so I'm going to give that a second try, and I'm going to give that one a second coat. So I'm going to grab a little bit more, move to the next flower. This next flower, let's go right along here. Maybe do this bottom section like that. I think I'll add a little bit here in the middle, just a little tiny bit. And then wipe my excess off and use that ink I have extra there to move around on my petal. And this one also has some little petals. It looks like it kind of maybe folds around on this side. So I'm going to come back and add a little bit of dark on that side. Like that. I think that looks good. Okay, and this one's had a little bit of time to dry, so I'm going to go back and add the second coat to this one. I think it needs just a little bit more. There, that looks good. Okay, Okay, moving right along. We'll go up here and we'll do this top one. Since I just colored that one, I'm going to go over here and skip over here to do this one. So I want it to be darkest on this bottom down here, maybe up that seam. And this is the back of a petal. I'll add a couple of dots in there. Okay, and then wipe my brush off. And come back and spread that ink up here towards the top. And then we'll get this back one. And I'm thinking maybe this bottom section right here, maybe around the bottom right there. And wipe your brush off and come back and move that ink around. A couple little white spots in there and cover those up. Okay, so I think I'll actually go down here and add a little bit more to this one too. Purple that up just a little bit more. I'm liking the pretty purple color. Okay, I'm liking how those look. Looks really good. So that is our Charming Edwin card kit. You can head over to the store and see if that's still available. Just put Charming Edwin in the little search box at the top of the store. And thanks for coloring with me today. Have a great day. Bye.